Welcome to Ancient Mysteries. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we turn our gaze to the frozen edges of the known world. A place whispered about in ancient myths where the sun never sets and a divine race once lived in peace and wisdom. Is it just legend, or the key to a forgotten chapter of human history? This is the story of Hyperborea, the mysterious land beyond the north wind. The earliest references to Hyperborea come from ancient Greek sources. The name itself means beyond Boreas, the north wind. In Greek cosmology, Boreas was the personification of the icy wind that howled down from the frozen north. To live beyond that wind implied a realm untouched by the harshness of ordinary human life, a place of eternal spring, untouched by suffering or war. According to Herodotus, the father of history, the Hyperboreans were a blessed people who lived far beyond the lands of the known world. They were said to dwell in perpetual sunlight, in a land where crops grew without toil and where death was rare and peaceful. The poet Pindar described Hyperborea as a place of music, harmony, and holiness, where Apollo, the god of light and prophecy, would retreat during the cold winter months. He would leave his temple at Delphi and journey to this mysterious northern paradise, welcomed by its radiant inhabitants. Some believed that the Hyperboreans were not just remote, but immortal, a race of radiant beings, perhaps more divine than human. They lived without illness, violence, or corruption. Their lives were simple, guided by sacred ritual and a deep connection to the natural world. This utopian society was believed to predate all known civilizations. In Greek accounts, the Hyperboreans were already ancient when the first temples were raised in Athens. They sent gifts, wrapped in sacred straw, down a mysterious chain of lands, through the Scythians, the Thracians, and finally to the temple of Apollo at Delphi. No one knew how far north their homeland truly was. Some suggested the farthest edges of Thrace. Others believed it lay beyond the Riphean Mountains, a name now lost to modern geography. But always, the Hyperboreans remained just out of reach, real enough to influence religious ritual, but distant enough to remain cloaked in myth. Later Roman sources picked up the tale. The historian Pliny the Elder described the Hyperboreans as living for 1,000 years, only choosing death when they were ready. They would throw themselves into the sea in a final act of willful transcendence. Even in the days of the Roman Empire, Hyperborea remained a symbol of a lost golden age, a pre-fall civilization that stood as the inverse of Rome's growing decadence. But who were these people? Were they a metaphor, an ideal, or a cultural memory of a real ancient race? The deeper one looks into the myths of Hyperborea, the more it echoes stories from other cultures, of beings of light, of skyborn teachers, and of civilizations that vanished without a trace. In the ancient world, such stories were rarely invented. They were passed down, preserved. And if the Greeks had a name for this northern paradise, perhaps others did too. The central mystery of Hyperborea lies in its elusive geography. Despite being frequently mentioned in ancient texts, no precise location was ever recorded. The Greeks spoke of it as being far to the north, beyond the reach of their own explorations, but the descriptions are vague, poetic, and often contradictory. Some accounts suggest it was an island surrounded by ocean, while others speak of high mountains or endless plains. All agreed, however, that it was a place beyond hardship, a land where the sun shone day and night, where death came not by disease, but by quiet choice. This image of an Arctic paradise clashes with the modern understanding of the polar regions as barren, frozen, and inhospitable. But in recent decades, a growing number of researchers have pointed to the Younger Dryas period, more than 12,000 years ago, when the Earth experienced a sudden and dramatic shift in climate. Before this cataclysm, parts of the Arctic may have been lush, green, and temperate. Some scientists have even proposed that the North Pole itself may not have always been frozen. If true, this would mean that the ancient stories of a fertile land in the far north might not be fantasy, but distant memory. Further deepening the mystery are the myths of other ancient cultures. Norse legends speak of a land called Ultima Thule, far to the north, bathed in eternal daylight. Hindu cosmology describes a sacred region called Shambhala, hidden in the mountains to the north, inhabited by enlightened beings. In Native American traditions, there are stories of ancestral tribes migrating from the land of the White Sun, a place of purity and knowledge that once existed in the distant north. Even Plato's account of Atlantis, though centered in the Atlantic Ocean, shares striking similarities. A highly advanced society destroyed by sudden catastrophe, a race of noble people living in harmony with nature, a civilization whose loss marks the beginning of human decline. Could Hyperborea and Atlantis be two different names for the same forgotten epoch? Or are they fragments of an even older story, preserved in pieces by cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time? The mystery also persists in ancient maps. The Mercator map of 1595, for instance, depicts a polar continent divided into 4 quadrants by rivers, surrounding a magnetic mountain. Some believe this image reflects older knowledge, passed down through unknown sources, perhaps even from Hyperborea itself. These accounts, while dismissed by mainstream historians, have stirred curiosity in explorers, mystics, and researchers for centuries. If Hyperborea did exist, then what happened to it? And if it did not, why did so many cultures imagine something so similar in the same unreachable place? Throughout history, a handful of curious discoveries and ancient references have kept the possibility of Hyperborea alive, not just as a myth, but as a memory anchored in real, physical evidence. While no formal archaeological site has been officially designated as Hyperborean, certain artifacts and anomalies continue to fuel speculation. Some of the most tantalizing clues come from the far northern regions of Europe and Asia, places long regarded as remote, frozen, and inhospitable, but which may once have been very different. In the Russian Kola Peninsula, near the Arctic Circle, researchers have uncovered massive stone labyrinths and megalithic formations, many of which have no known origin or explanation. Some of these structures are believed to be more than 4,000 years old. Their purpose remains unknown. No written records accompany them, and the indigenous Sami people have preserved only vague oral traditions of ancient sky gods and great northern beings who once lived in the land before the ice. These ruins, often aligned with solstices and lunar cycles, resemble the ritual sites found in more temperate parts of the world, such as Stonehenge or the temples of Malta, but their extreme location raises new questions. Who built them? Why here? And where did they go? In Siberia, strange circular stone formations dot the landscape, some of which are positioned in patterns that suggest astronomical significance. Even more bizarre are the legends that accompany them. Tales of giants, luminous beings, and strange metallic objects hidden beneath the ground. Some of these stories date back thousands of years and were passed on by indigenous tribes who had no known contact with the classical world. The consistency of these myths, particularly their references to a golden race or a lost homeland in the far north, mirrors the descriptions of the Hyperboreans in uncanny ways. Another physical anomaly is found in Greenland and the Canadian Arctic. Beneath layers of ice, satellite imagery has revealed grid-like patterns and geometric anomalies that do not resemble natural formations. Some independent researchers have proposed that these could be remnants of ancient structures, now buried under glaciers that only formed after the sudden climatic collapse of the Younger Dryas period. While such interpretations remain speculative and are not accepted by mainstream archaeology, they echo the recurring theme that something once existed in the far north that defies current understanding. Ancient maps, particularly those created for the modern age of polar exploration, sometimes depict land masses at the North Pole that no longer exist. The Mercator projection of the late 16th century, for example, shows a central Arctic island surrounded by 4 rivers, with an enormous mountain at the centre, labelled Rupus Nigra, or the Black Rock. According to Mercator, this map was based on much older sources. Was this a mythical representation, or a degraded memory of a once real location? These pieces, the unexplained ruins, the geographic anomalies, and the strange polar cartography, do not prove the existence of Hyperborea, but they refuse to go away. They remain on the edges of our maps and at the margins of our history. They hint at a story half erased, still waiting to be uncovered. Among conventional scholars and historians, Hyperborea is generally regarded as a symbolic construct, a mythical representation of paradise, not a real location. In this view, ancient references to Hyperborea reflect a cultural longing for a lost golden age rather than an actual geographic region. Classical scholars argue that the Greeks, like many ancient peoples, created idealized worlds as spiritual metaphors. Hyperborea, in this context, was a mythic expression of human aspirations: eternal youth, peace, harmony, and freedom from suffering. Herodotus, often cited as a key source, was careful in how he described Hyperborea. He presented the information as second-hand, passed on through various cultures, and noted that much of what he heard could not be verified. Later historians, including Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, treated the Hyperborean accounts with similar skepticism, acknowledging their mythological nature while still preserving the details. These ancient writers often associated Hyperborea with religious symbolism, particularly the worship of Apollo. The recurring image of the god retreating to the north during the winter has been interpreted as allegory, perhaps describing the seasonal cycles of the sun or the spiritual journey inward toward enlightenment. Modern scholars build on this interpretation, viewing Hyperborea through the lens of psychology, literature, and comparative mythology. The idea of a land beyond the reach of pain, where the sun never sets and people live in effortless joy, is seen as a universal archetype, a kind of collective dream that appears in cultures across time. Carl Jung and later mythologists proposed that such recurring motifs point not to physical locations, but to shared human desires, encoded in the subconscious mind. Geographically, many historians argue that Hyperborea was a misunderstanding or poetic exaggeration of real northern lands, such as Scythia, Thrace, or even the British Isles. As Greek sailors ventured farther north, their reports of long summer days, strange rituals, and unfamiliar people may have inspired tales that grew in the retelling. The phenomenon of the midnight sun, observed above the Arctic Circle, would have appeared miraculous to early observers and could easily have fed into myths of eternal daylight. From a linguistic perspective, there is no known ancient word or inscription directly linking Hyperborea to a specific culture or site. It exists solely in Greek and Roman literature, without archaeological or documentary support from the people supposedly living there. No Hyperborean writing has been discovered, no artifacts labelled with their name. To many researchers, this absence speaks volumes. In their view, Hyperborea is not a lost civilization, but a mirror, reflecting humanity's oldest hopes, not its forgotten history. Even among the most generous interpretations, the consensus remains cautious. There is no concrete proof of an advanced northern civilization that aligns with the ancient descriptions. And yet, the persistence of the Hyperborean myth, its global parallels, and the geographical peculiarities surrounding it continue to unsettle the clean divisions between myth and memory. For conventional scholars, Hyperborea remains a legend, not because it has been disproven, but because it has never been definitively found. Yet even within academic circles, there is a growing awareness of the limits of conventional interpretation. As our understanding of ancient climate patterns, ocean currents, and tectonic shifts deepens, so too does the possibility that what was once considered myth may hold fragments of truth. The story of Hyperborea sits at the crossroads of memory and myth, not because it has been proven false, but because so many essential questions remain unanswered. And it is in these unanswered questions that cracks begin to appear in the mainstream narrative. First is the issue of ancient memory. How could multiple ancient cultures, Greek, Norse, Hindu, Native American and Tibetan, all hold remarkably similar stories of a luminous, peaceful land in the far north? Each tradition speaks of beings of light, wisdom, and longevity. Each describes a sacred place that is difficult or impossible to reach in the present day. These cultures had no known contact with one another, yet their stories resonate as if drawn from a common source. Could these be the inherited memories of a shared past, distorted over millennia but grounded in something real? Another unresolved puzzle lies in the symbolic association between Hyperborea and advanced knowledge. In Greek tradition, it was from Hyperborea that sacred offerings were sent to Delphi, the very heart of Greek prophecy. This was not a fictional detail, but a ritual embedded in religious practice. The idea that Delphi, one of the most revered sites of the ancient world, owed part of its spiritual legacy to an unseen land in the far north raises further questions. Was Hyperborea more than myth? Was it considered by the Greeks to be a source of spiritual power, perhaps even a primordial origin? Then there is the geological mystery. The Younger Dryas event, which occurred around 12,800 years ago, marked a sudden and violent drop in global temperatures. Before this event, some regions near the Arctic Circle were believed to have milder, even temperate climates. Core samples from northern Greenland suggest vegetation once grew there that cannot survive in modern polar conditions. If a civilization had existed in these latitudes before the ice returned, its remains would likely lie buried beneath glaciers, completely hidden from view. The lack of evidence in this case does not disprove the possibility. It merely confirms how little of the prehistoric world has been explored or preserved. Satellite imagery has revealed strange topographical features at both poles, grid-like shapes, circular depressions, and mountain formations that seem unnaturally symmetrical. Mainstream geology often attributes these to natural processes, wind erosion, ice flow, or volcanic activity. But others ask whether we are dismissing these patterns too quickly. If a civilization had existed in the far north, the environmental collapse at the end of the Pleistocene would have wiped away nearly all trace of it. Only the most resilient structures, perhaps megaliths, perhaps maps, perhaps myths, would remain, and so the contradictions persist. The ancient stories of Hyperborea do not fit neatly within the framework of accepted history, but neither do they fully dissolve under scrutiny. They linger, strange, persistent, and deeply unsettling, not because they are irrational, but because they might be just rational enough to deserve a second look. While mainstream archaeology stops at the edge of verifiable evidence, a wide range of fringe theories has stepped beyond, offering alternative interpretations of the Hyperborean mystery. These ideas often challenge established timelines, question traditional geography, and propose the existence of highly advanced ancient civilizations whose knowledge was lost in cataclysm. Though unproven, they persist because they offer explanations for anomalies the conventional narrative cannot easily resolve. One of the most enduring theories suggests that Hyperborea was not merely a land of peace and light, but the cradle of all Indo-European civilization. According to this idea, long before Sumer or Egypt rose, a race of enlightened beings lived in the far north, spreading knowledge, language, and cosmic science to the rest of the world after their homeland was destroyed. These Hyperboreans are sometimes described as semi-divine or even extraterrestrial in origin, not because of fantasy, but because of their apparent mastery of energy, sound, and geometry. Ancient myths describe them as tall, radiant, and ageless, with a deep understanding of the stars and the seasons. In esoteric traditions, especially those influenced by theosophy and later occult philosophies, Hyperborea is said to have been the first spiritual root race, a non-physical or semi-etheric people who lived in harmony with the earth and the cosmos. Helena Blavatsky, writing in the late 19th century, described Hyperboreans as beings of light, living in a land that no longer exists in the physical plane. According to this cosmology, Hyperborea was destroyed not by war, but by a shift in planetary consciousness, a fall from a higher vibrational state that marked the descent into denser, more material civilizations. Other researchers propose that Hyperborea was a real physical civilization located at the North Pole, but destroyed during a massive Earth crust displacement, a theory popularized by Charles Hapgood and later supported in part by Albert Einstein. This idea suggests that a sudden slippage of the Earth's outer shell caused dramatic climate changes, rapidly freezing the northern regions and burying entire landscapes beneath ice. If Hyperborea had existed near the pole, such a shift would explain both its disappearance and the lack of surviving evidence. Still others connect Hyperborea to the hollow Earth theory, the belief that advanced civilizations once lived beneath the surface of the planet, using the poles as access points to an inner world. In this view, Hyperborea may not have vanished but retreated, continuing to exist in secrecy, shielded from modern discovery. Though widely dismissed, these theories often cite peculiar legends from indigenous Arctic peoples who speak of inner realms, sky people, or star-born ancestors who vanished into the earth or the mountains. Across all of these perspectives, one theme remains constant. Hyperborea was not just a place, but a civilization unlike anything that followed. Whether seen as spiritual, extraterrestrial, or simply ancient beyond measure, it represents a lost chapter, not only in human history, but in human potential. Its supposed wisdom, peace, and harmony contrast sharply with the rise and fall of later empires. And in that contrast, some see a warning, others see a key. Beyond its physical and historical implications, the legend of Hyperborea carries immense symbolic weight. It is more than just a story of a lost civilization. It is a mirror reflecting the deepest yearnings of the human spirit. In nearly every tradition that speaks of it, Hyperborea is described not only as peaceful and prosperous, but as spiritually elevated. It represents a state of being, a higher mode of existence in which humanity lived in harmony with nature, time, and the cosmos. Whether literal or not, this vision has endured for millennia because it taps into something universal, the desire to return to a world uncorrupted by power, war, or suffering. To the Greeks, Hyperborea was the land of the sun, a place where life was effortless, and where death came gently, like the setting of the sun. The Hyperboreans were said to dance and sing, offering sacred hymns to the gods without fear or sorrow. Their festivals were timeless, their rituals were harmonious. Their lives were said to unfold in perfect balance, untouched by the chaos that defines so much of the ancient world. In this way, Hyperborea became the antithesis of the Greek city-state, a vision of divine order that no empire could match. In modern interpretations, Hyperborea has been reimagined through the lens of spiritual philosophy. It is often equated with the idea of a primordial Eden, a place where consciousness had not yet fragmented, where human beings were not yet divided from the earth, from one another, or from the heavens. In some esoteric traditions, Hyperborea is associated with the crown chakra or with polar symbolism, the idea that the north, as the axis mundi or world pillar, holds the spiritual center of the earth. Here the legend becomes less about geography and more about metaphysics. Hyperborea is no longer a lost place, but a lost state of mind, a frequency we once lived in and somehow fell from. The symbolism extends even to its disappearance. The idea that Hyperborea was erased by a cataclysm, whether geological, spiritual, or dimensional, echoes the myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, and other sunken worlds. This recurring pattern of rise, transcendence, and fall appears across cultures, suggesting a universal rhythm. Civilizations ascend. They reach a pinnacle of light, knowledge, and connection, only to be swept away by forces greater than themselves. What remains is memory, encoded in myth, preserved in stone, or whispered through time. In this way, the myth of Hyperborea challenges us. It is not just about what may have existed, but what may still be possible. It dares us to imagine that history is not a straight line, but a cycle. That the future is not just forward, but inward. And that the true mystery is not whether Hyperborea once stood on the frozen edge of the earth, but whether it still echoes inside us, waiting to be remembered. When we trace the path Hyperborea has taken through time, from ancient myth to esoteric doctrine, from geographic enigma to spiritual metaphor, we find a constellation of ideas that refuses to fade. Each piece we have examined reveals not a single mystery, but a network of questions, overlapping across cultures, landscapes, and timelines. From the accounts of Greek poets and philosophers, to the sacred traditions of indigenous Arctic tribes, from forgotten maps and polar anomalies to speculative theories of lost civilizations, Hyperborea is less a singular place than it is a point of convergence. A name given to something we do not fully understand but cannot forget. What makes the legend so enduring is not only its content, but its consistency. In every version, the pattern repeats. A remote northern land bathed in light, inhabited by beings of peace and wisdom, untouched by decay. A paradise beyond time. This idea persists not just in the Western tradition, but in Tibetan stories of Shambhala, in Norse sagas of Asgard, and in the Hindu vision of Uttarakuru, a pure land to the north, where divine beings reside. These are not identical, but they are unmistakably aligned. They point in the same direction, to the top of the world, to the edge of memory, and to a time before time. The material clues are fewer, but no less compelling. Ancient stone structures in Arctic regions, unexplained magnetic anomalies beneath the polar ice, and depictions of northern continents on Renaissance maps all continue to defy easy explanation. The Mercator map, with its central black mountain and encircling rivers, stands as one of the most provocative images tied to the legend. Some say it is symbolic. Others believe it reflects knowledge that predated our current understanding of the world, perhaps passed down through secret traditions or survivors of a forgotten cataclysm. The scientific data offers no definitive answer, but it, too, holds space for possibility. The sudden onset of the Younger Dryas, the discovery of ancient plant life in Greenland, and the increasing evidence that climate and geography were radically different just 12,000 years ago all suggest that the story of Earth's past is far more complex than textbooks reveal. If a culture once thrived in what is now the Arctic, it would have been buried, frozen, and erased. Only myths, monuments, and magnetic traces would remain. And still Hyperborea remains just beyond the reach of proof. It is not a forgotten ruin that can be excavated. It is a shadow that stretches across languages and legends, visible not in stone, but in symbols, stories, and strange alignments. For some, that makes it less real. For others, it makes it more so. Because in a world shaped by cycles of memory and forgetting, sometimes the oldest truths survive not in the ground, but in the stories we cannot stop telling. The legend of Hyperborea does not end with a map or a monument. It lives on because it speaks to something deeper than discovery. It touches the realm of memory, the yearning for a time when humanity was more connected, more whole. Whether we see it as a literal place, a lost civilization, or a mythic reflection of a forgotten age, Hyperborea invites us to ask questions that history alone cannot answer. What if the past was more advanced than we imagine? What if memory can survive collapse, not through artifacts, but through story? In many ways, Hyperborea serves as a symbol for what has been buried, not only under ice and time, but within ourselves. It represents an origin point, a sacred center, a time before fragmentation, a civilization that may have lived in alignment with forces we no longer understand. If it once existed, it may have held knowledge of the stars, of energy, of spirit, knowledge not lost, but dormant, waiting, echoing through the oldest myths and the quietest ruins. We may never uncover physical proof of Hyperborea in the way we have uncovered Troy or Babylon, but that does not make it less significant. The persistence of the myth, across continents and centuries, suggests something deeper is at work. Myths do not survive this long without reason. They endure because they are rooted in something we feel but cannot name, a resonance with our origins, or perhaps with our destiny. Today, as the ice recedes and the poles become more accessible, the ancient question lingers. What lies beneath? What memory waits in the cold silence of the north? Are we approaching a time when Hyperborea is no longer a myth but a rediscovery? Or is its greatest truth the one hidden in its mystery, that paradise is not a place to find, but a knowledge to remember? Thanks for listening. This has been Ancient Mysteries. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, gain access to bonus content, and unlock our entire library of video podcasts, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.